government spending as a tool for economic stimulus. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It is a free and easy way to support the channel. Now, let me preface this by saying that I believe John Maynard Keynes to be one of the great minds of the 20th century. I believe his contributions to economics, the field of economics, can't be understated. However, I am by no means a Keynesian economist. I believe a lot of the things that are wrong with the world today, a lot of the short-termism when it comes to government intervention, not thinking about the long-term effects, is down to an oversubscription to Keynesian thinking. I think there needs to be a bit more of a balance. There needs to be more of the Austrian school in global institutions. There are a lot of world governments that think they can spend their way out of problems most of the time, so much so that they get into such massive debt because they believe, oh, well, if we spend now, we'll be fine in the future, which isn't always the case. But I do want to give a fair critique because there are inherent strengths and weaknesses to all schools of thought. But this is my look at government spending as a tool for economic growth and stimulating the economy. And this is a comparative evaluation of Keynesian and Austrian perspectives. Government spending has long been a central instrument in economic policy making. Keynesian economists advocate for active fiscal intervention to stimulate demand during downturns, arguing that governments can mitigate recessions through deliberate public expenditure. In contrast, Austrian economists are deeply skeptical of government intervention, arguing that spending distorts market signals. It encourages malinvestment and leads to long-term economic instability. That's where the big difference is. We tend to look at the long term, and by we I mean Austrian economists. Whereas Keynesian economists, Keynes's famous quote is, "In the long term, we're all dead." Now, while both schools offer compelling arguments, the practical application of these theories in various countries has yielded mixed results. We can look at the United States, Malawi, Zimbabwe, South Africa, South Korea, and Singapore in this video. Keynesian economics, born out of the Great Depression, posits that recessions result from a collapse in aggregate demand, and that government must step in when the private sector is unwilling or unable to spend. This theory has underpinned many successful interventions. For example, during the 1930s Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal embodied Keynesian principles through massive public works programs, social security systems, and infrastructure spending. While the New Deal did not fully end the Depression, it restored confidence, it reduced unemployment, and laid the foundation for post-war growth. More recently, the 2008 global financial crisis saw the Obama administration implement a $787 billion stimulus package through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. While criticized by some, most economists agree that it prevented a deeper recession and aided recovery. These interventions reflect the Keynesian belief that timely, targeted government spending can stabilize economies during severe downturns. If we look at South Korea, after the Korean War, South Korea adopted a state-led development model. Through strategic investment in heavy industry, education, and infrastructure, the government guided the private sector and built global industrial champions such as Samsung and Hyundai. This state activism, aligned with Keynesian principles of coordinated investment and demand management, turned a war-torn economy into one of the most advanced in the world. Now, here is the critique from the Austrian school of thought. Austrian economists reject the Keynesian faith in government intervention. They argue that recessions are necessary corrections to prevent economic distortions, and that artificial stimulus only delays the inevitable crash while creating long-term instability. The examples of this are multiple. We look at Zimbabwe with the hyperinflation and fiscal irresponsibility. The country of Zimbabwe offered a textbook example of what Austrian economists warn against. In the 2000s, the Mugabe regime engaged in excessive government spending, including wage increases, farm takeovers, and military expenditures, without corresponding increases in productivity. This was funded by printing money and external borrowing, and this spending led to hyperinflation, peaking at 89.7 sextillion% per month in 2008. That is not even hyperinflation, that is super hyper mega inflation. Far from stabilizing the economy, public spending destroyed trust in the currency and in the state. The Austrian critique finds validation here. Unchecked spending, absent real value creation, leads to economic collapse. If we look at Malawi, Malawi has frequently employed expansionary fiscal policy, often under the guidance of the IMF and the World Bank. However, increased government spending has not yielded consistent or meaningful growth. Stimulus packages are often undermined by corruption, inflated procurement contracts, and poor implementation in general. In such a context, the Keynesian assumption of efficient and benevolent government, it doesn't hold. That is the one major problem with the theory. It assumes that a government is always going to be competent, it's always going to have the best interest of the people in mind, but in the real world, this isn't the case. Much of the expenditure leaks through graft or is spent on imports, and it produces minimal multiplier effects. Austrian economists would argue that in such settings, government spending crowds out private investment and it worsens macroeconomic stability. There are examples where there are mixed outcomes, and this illustrates the complexity of government spending. If we look at South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa has pursued large-scale government spending to address inequality and stimulate growth. Initiatives such as infrastructure development, public housing, social grants, they've lifted millions of people out of poverty. However, state-owned enterprises like Eskom, Transnet, they've been plagued with mismanagement and corruption. South Africa's fiscal activism aligns with Keynesian aims, but the institutional weaknesses and lack of productivity mean that public spending has had limited success in driving sustainable growth. Mixed bag. If we look at Singapore, this is a more unique hybrid. While it favors free market policies, its government has also played a strong technocratic role in guiding investment in housing, healthcare, and education. During downturns such as the 2009 global recession and then the COVID-19 pandemic, Singapore deployed timely, well-targeted fiscal stimulus without undermining fiscal sustainability. The state's strong institutions and low corruption levels ensure that government spending is effective. So this would suggest that Keynesian interventions can succeed when institutions are competent and disciplined. And as someone who leans more towards the Austrian school of thought, I grudgingly accept this to be true. In conclusion, I believe institutions matter more than the ideology, the school of thought. The divide between Keynesian and Austrian views on government spending hinges largely on assumptions about the state's competence. Keynesians view the government as a potential stabilizer of demand, capable of correcting market failures. Austrian economists view it as an unreliable, distortionary force whose interventions do more harm than good more often than not. In practice, both are right, depending on the country. In countries like South Korea and Singapore, government spending succeeded because it was strategic, well managed, corruption free. In Zimbabwe and Malawi, spending failed because it was corrupt, it was inflationary, and it was poorly targeted. The United States and South Africa, they demonstrate that success depends not only on the amount of spending, but also on the quality of institutions, timing, and the composition of the expenditure. Ultimately, the effectiveness of government spending is not determined solely by theory or school of thought, but by governance, context, and credibility. Keynesian tools may have value, but only in the hands of capable stewards. When institutions are weak, the Austrian suspicion of state intervention remains not only valid, but necessary. But these are just my thoughts. Thank you for tuning in once again. I will see you in the next video. Also, you can share your thoughts in the comment section below. All right, see you.